know, that if there's something falling through the cracks or if there's something that's, you know, just here and there.
So maybe you got a perfect old version of you got something in D12?
How much shelf space do you need?
I can go as low as 10, 12,000. I can go as high as 30.
You need documents?
I need 2 documents.
Okay. I have a
I mean,
you want to know Cleveland, you want to know Metropolitan, you want to know Silver? You want to fill that out.
so I've got real estate brokers looking at real industrial spaces, but they're all out in
We're about to get started, but I just want to let anyone know, members of the public that are here, we do have a sign-in sheet up front. If you would like to speak during public comment, if you would sign your name and information on that sheet, it would be appreciated. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Go ahead and get started. I'm Dustin Hillis, Chair of the Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee. This is our work session going over the code enforcement's administrative NREM process for demolishing or cleaning and closing vacant properties that are in the code enforcement spectrum. So I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Waits to my far left, Councilmember Antonio Lewis, Councilmember Andrea Boone, and Councilmember Byron Ames to my right. So we'll go ahead and get started. And first up, we're going to have a presentation by Code Enforcement, APD Code Enforcement section. And we're going to start with Deputy Chief Carvin Tyus. Deputy Chief Tyus.
Good morning, everyone. As you said, I'm Deputy Chief Carvin Tyus of the Community Service Division, and so the Code Enforcement Office fall under me. First of all, thank you, Councilmember Hillis, for having us here. I think it's important that we have this workshop because it does two things. It allows us to show everyone the process we're using when we identify these properties for demolition. It is a slippery slope that we go down with addressing the concerns of the community about abandoned houses and dilapidated properties in that area. Also, we still want to afford the owners of these properties the right to appeal. So again, there's a slippery slope that we walk on, and we try to make sure that we're affording everybody due process in this. And I think after today, you'll just kind of see that there is an in-depth process. There is a check and balance system in place to ensure that everybody's afforded due process. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Deputy Director Tally, and she'll just kind of go through the process with us. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Tyus, for that, and we'll welcome to the podium the Deputy Director of Code Enforcement, Daphne Talley. Ms. Talley, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Chief Tyus. I'm getting some assistance here. We have some props. Good morning again, Daphne Talley. We'd like to thank the team, and I would like to thank the Public Safety Committee for holding this work session. We're very pleased to present today. I think we've put together a presentation that is going to show how our team gets to the point of demolishing these vacant and abandoned structures in the city of Atlanta. Mrs. Jocelyn Lowes, our Code Enforcement Manager, is going to assist with this presentation today, and I'm going to use her early on to hold up a couple of props during the presentation. Okay, we have the clicker. So the agenda, we're going to talk about the compliance resolution staff, just a quick introduction. The inspections workflow, that slide is going to show you the life cycle of an inspection of a complaint. Generally, before these complaints are moved over to the compliance resolution team. And then lastly, the administrative interim proceedings. So the compliance resolution staff, which we have here today, and I won't introduce them individually, but I will ask them to stand. So this is our compliance resolution team. Back in 2010, the compliance resolution team was a one-woman show. And after noticing that we had an abundance of complaints that were not easily resolved, these were complaints that have gone through or had gone through our inspections process, but we could not hold the homeowner accountable, or we could not get them to bring those properties into compliance. They restructured this team, and a team of one was moved to 4, 6, and now 8. And Ms. Lowes actually manages that team currently. So first, this is our inspections workflow. And so you see that there are several boxes on this slide. So the life cycle of an inspection starts with a complaint being filed with our office, primarily through the ATL 311 call center. When that complaint is filed, it is categorized as either a property maintenance violation or a highly hazardous violation. And we define those property maintenance violations are those that are non-threatening. So that's your overgrowth, grass that exceeds 12 inches in height, your trash and debris, your minor property maintenance violations. The other category is our highly hazardous category, and that is what I want to focus on today. Those are the violations that will eventually transfer over to the compliance resolution team for administrative interim consideration. But again, I want to take you through this particular process to let you know all that we do to try to get voluntary compliance from the property owner. So after that inspection is completed, violation is confirmed, and again, I'm going to focus on the highly hazardous violation for right now. If an officer goes out to a property and that property is unsecured, that property has fire damage, or the building itself has collapsed or is in danger of collapsing, we post this placard. This is a yellow neon placard that basically says, warning, this property is unsafe. They post this, they date it, they provide the officer's name, they provide a phone number. They take a picture of it, that picture is placed in our database. After research is complete, we send out a placard notice, basically saying the same thing that is noted here on this placard. We send that to the property owner. Since the pandemic, our property maintenance violations, we would send out a courtesy notice. And a courtesy notice is because our code does not require that we send out a notice of violation letter, but we do it anyways because we know people do not have an understanding of the code. And for the highly hazardous, prior to the pandemic, after that placard letter is mailed, we would try to issue a summons, a citation, to appear in municipal court. But since the pandemic, everyone gets a notice. Everyone gets a courtesy notice allowing 30 days to bring these properties into compliance. When the properties are not in compliance after the expiration of that notice, a citation is prepared, and again, we make every attempt to personally serve that property owner to come to court and address those code violations. We have, and this has been one of our biggest challenges since I've been with the City of Atlanta since 2007. Personally serving a citation is not always easy. A lot of our property owners are not in the City of Atlanta, and sometimes when they are, they're not coming to the door. Sometimes they're out of state, sometimes they're out of the country. But we make every effort. We use a process server locally. We use our police officers. We use our code enforcement officers. And we have relationships with other jurisdictions. So we send those citations out to Gwinnett County, to Cobb County, Bibb County. We are trying to make every effort to get these property owners to comply the property again before a case is transferred over for administrative interim consideration. So sometimes you guys will see that a case, or the life cycle of a case was filed in January. It is still open. The violation is still there. August of that same year, sometimes December of that same year. But all of this is working in the background because we are trying to hold that property owner accountable. We have a budget that we receive every year for these demolition projects, and I think Ms. Lau stated to you about a month ago that we will never have enough funding to take care of every code violation in the City of Atlanta. So again, we try to explore every tool that we have in our toolbox to get these properties into compliance. So when we cannot, which is more often than we would like, these cases are transferred over to our compliance resolution team. Now, our compliance resolution team handles more than just the administrative in-rem proceedings, but that is their primary responsibility. So most cases that are transferred are those cases that the grass needs to be cut. There's some other property maintenance violations that, again, we've not been able to get that homeowner to comply. But our primary focus on the compliance resolution team is to manage the administrative interim proceedings, and that is Article 3 of the 1987 City of Atlanta Housing Code. This is the most common method that we use to bring these properties that we consider a threat to public safety and health into compliance. This is when the city is seeking authorization to bring these properties into compliance. And in rem is a Latin term that means action against property, not people, and that is what we're doing. I'm going to stay on this slide for a second because I want to explain. Go ahead.
So if it can be repaired at less than 50% of the value, what do we do?
So that's where I'm going. So how the staff determines whether we can ask our administrative interim review board for authorization to demolish versus clean and close. So we go out, they do an assessment of that property, they're looking at the interior, they're looking at the exterior, they're making note of all of those infractions at that location. And then they come back in, they take the contractor's guide for repairing and remodeling to price out how much it would cost to bring that property up to code. We're not trying to build a mansion. We're just trying to bring that property into compliance. So they take that number and they divide it by the value of that structure, which we use the Fulton County as well as the DeKalb County's tax assessor's website to get the value of that structure. And the value excludes the lot as well as the foundation. And once that number is divided, if the number that comes back is above 50%, then we can request the board give the city authorization to demolish. If it's less than, we can request the board give us authorization to clean and close. Make sense?
Do y'all keep a record of that?
Yes. So
Okay.
There's a copy of the assessment in each investigative file that we have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Talley, before you continue, just want to recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Westmoreland and also President Shipman. Thank you.
And so I'm not going to go through this particular slide. I just wanted to use it as a reference while I go through the next slide. And I think you guys received a copy of the booklet. And I did not mention, so the PowerPoint presentation as well as the housing code is in the booklet that we provided this morning. So if you guys like to follow along. But once that assessment has been completed, this is our notification process. This is the hearing preparation. So that property, once eligibility has been confirmed, it is posted, not with a placard, but we post an 8.5 by 11 sheet. Basically, it's a public notice. So this is for the owners, this is for the public, letting them know that there will be a hearing and why there will be a hearing for this particular location. The title examination is ordered. That title examination is going to tell us who owns that property and who has a vested interest in that property. Those are the folks that we're going to send a certified letter to informing them of the public hearing and inspection. Included in that document, or included in that letter, is an insert giving folks instructions on how to bring their property into compliance if they want to do so. That is done. Generally, the letters go out about 16 days prior to the hearing. The code says 14 days. The posting that we post informing them of the hearing, the code says 14 days. We post it 30 days prior to the hearing. And the code also says for those addresses that are not easily ascertained by our office that we are to publish that hearing information into the newspaper in which the sheriff's advertisements appear in such county. We do it for all properties. Even if we've made contact with the property owner, that address is still listed in that particular publication. And for Fulton County, that's the Fulton County Champion. And for DeKalb County, for Fulton County, it's the Fulton County Daily Report. And for DeKalb County, it's the DeKalb County Champion. So again, we do that for all addresses that will be listed on that agenda. And the last thing that we do in preparation of the hearing is we file a list pendant in the Office of the Clerk of Superior Court. And that is done generally about a week prior to the hearing. And that list pendants, of course, is to notify the world that there is some pending litigation between that property and the city. So this is hearing and post-hearing. During the hearing, our Administrative Interim Review Board, which consists of 5 board members, they hear testimony from staff. We provide photographs. We introduce the assessment of inspection that we talked about. They hear from the public. They hear from the owners. We hear from the folks that have a vested interest in that particular property. And based on all of this information, the board will make a decision as to whether or not they are going to give authorization to our office to demolish or clean and close that property. After that, a copy of that demolition order is mailed out to all of the folks that received the public notice, the owners and folks that had a vested interest in the property. That is mailed out via certified mail. All of our letters are via certified mail. And lastly, the property is placarded with this orange neon sticker. Same information, warning, this property is unsafe. So we have so far placarded these properties at least twice with a placard, and then if they are on an interim agenda, there's that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that provides the information of the assessment, the hearing date, time, location. Thank you, Ms. Vanna White.
One quick, I just wanted to be clear.
Councilmember, if you could, would rather save all questions at the end, unless you just have a pressing question you want to ask right now.
Just wanted to be clear about some on the last slide.
Okay.
Are you saying that once a house is on the list to be demolished, you still have time to fix it?
Yes. Yes. So that's where we're going next. The board will generally give up to 120 days. This is after we've gone through the life cycle of the inspections process, after we've placarded, posted, our board will still, depending on the scope of the work that owner provides during that hearing, and I'm going to introduce, we do have two of our board members here, and I want them to come up and speak as well, but they give additional time to bring these properties into compliance. Then we have these clearances that we are mandated to receive by local and state clearances that we have to receive before a city demolishes a property. There's our Section 106 clearance through the State Historic Preservation Office. That generally takes up to 30 days to receive. And again, both of these are if we are spending federal funds. And sometimes we don't know which pot of funds we're going to spend from. So we generally take all of our cases through these particular processes. An environmental clearance through our Department of Grants and Community Department is also required when we are spending federal dollars. We conduct asbestos testing. Every property that is going to be torn down, we have to confirm whether or not that property has asbestos. If asbestos is there, it has to be abated before we demolish. Once that is done, that project is awarded to a city contractor. That city contractor is responsible for the road abatement as well as applying for the demolition permit to demolish that property. So in essence, even with this particular scenario, it can still take us anywhere from 6 to 9 months to demolish that structure. And this is an insert that we wanted to share because this is something that we did during the pandemic because the Office of Buildings, of course, went to an online service pretty quickly. I think we all converted to a telework schedule in March of 2020, and I believe the Office of Buildings had their permitting process up about 3 weeks after that. So we created this document to insert along with these letters that we're sending out with our contact information and basically giving instructions on what is required to obtain the permits to bring your property into compliance. One of the other things that we did was the payoffs for any property, or any property owner wanted to bring their properties into compliance. Of course, any monies that we've spent in preparation for the hearing, we wanted to recoup. And so they would have to, prior to this, they would have to request a payoff from the Department of Finance, Office of Revenue. That was taking upwards of 30 days. So after meeting with the Department of Finance and saying, what can we do to streamline that process, they gave us authorization to generate these payoff letters, and we got that down to 3 days. And as I stated before, I was going to be sharing this presentation, and I am going to let Ms. Lyles come up and go through the next slides.
Good morning. Thank you so much for allowing us to be able to show what we do as a demonstration of all of the efforts that we make and cumulative efforts and over time. This particular slide is a property in your District 3. This property, multifamily dwelling, maintained in poor condition, well, not maintained, should I say. And the condition that you see there is the time in 2010 when we got our initial complaint. Over time, we have extended notifications, contacts, efforts, all the things necessary to get voluntary compliance, which is our mantra. Our mantra is to get the owners to come to us to help us to make our neighborhoods safer, and this is what we have. And over time, it took from 2010, when the initial complaint was filed, until a lot later, until we finally brought this owner to the in rem process. Our compliance resolution efforts began. Now, this is coupled with all the activities that were conducted prior to it being turned over to us, because we simply had to make a move and to bring the details of this case to the public a little bit more. So, in February 2020, the interim board met and a demolition order was issued. Subsequently, in November 2020, we awarded this job of demolition for this site to our citywide contractor, and in May 2021, these permits were issued to all contractors. Now, after that, what had happened was we began the process of getting permits. We began the process of evaluating the property for cost, and then after the permits were issued and the demolition started on half of this project, the owner decided to come forward. This is something that's typical in our experience through the years. And so as we began to do the demolition, we found, interestingly enough, one morning, is that the owners decided they wanted to do the work that we had been asking them to do, but they did so without a permit. Issuance of a permit is required to do a demolition, both for the safety and the well-being of the community at large, and also acknowledgement of the cost involved and revenue to the city. That was in April 2021. After this started, we were issued a temporary restraining order from the owner, and so that prolonged our process of clearing this blight from this community. In January 2022, the owner finally applied for demolition permits after some degree of stalling and negotiation with their legal people and ours. Now, presently, it's still stalled. The demolition permit one of them has been issued. Of course, there are a couple of activities that have to be permitted in this process. And so while we're dealing now with what you see here, this is a result of their effort to demolish without a permit. This has left the community very, very angry, upset, and in danger of the remnants of a failed effort by the owner to do the work we asked them to do legally. Presently, the permit has still not been fully issued, and it is in the final processes, I must say. As of this morning, they are in the final process of site review, which the permit process has gotten rather involved. It's involved for our contractors as well as for the owners. Now, in our next slide, this property is single-family residence. Of course, we are conducting in-rem processes through single-family, multifamily, and commercial. In this particular situation, in 2015, the complaint was filed against this property for overgrowth, junk, trash, and debris, which is clear. And 2017, this was, should I say, increased, for lack of a better term at this time. That property was overgrown, open, and vacant, and then, of course, was turned over to compliance resolution to begin our process to reach out. At this time, of course, during the time of the pandemic, the owner was notified and attended a virtual hearing. And this virtual hearing, unfortunately, she was not able to see the property that she had bought so many years ago and failed to maintain. She purchased the property in 1984, and nothing was done to that property since her initial purchase. In April 2022, the owner failed to start the process to secure the property and to rehabilitate the property, Okay, so you have an out-of-state owner. You have an out-of-state owner who sought to create generational wealth. That generational wealth, of course, is important to us all, but this is one, an out-of-state owner, and two, someone who does not have eyes on the ground here and has failed to maintain the property. As you see, your roof, walls, everything is destroyed pretty much, and it is not one that can be rehabilitated, but this is a person who did not want to demolish. And so there we have it. So our next case, one of many, in District 4. This first picture on top was that which was presented to us in the initial complaint in 2015. Complaint was filed for overgrowth. Eventually it elevated in 2016 for other types of violations, none of which were corrected. And subsequently, we were contacted by the neighbors for a highly hazardous condition at this property, and we attempted and reached out to the owners. No response. So to NREM it went. And then in June 2020, we received a call from the family members after the results of the hearing and notifications to the owner of the order that we had achieved. And they asked for additional time to deal with probate issues, as we found out that the owner for this property was in fact deceased. The heirs during the virtual hearing did attend. They had let us know that these are the conditions that were present, both with the family and with the structure. In this situation, our board extended a compliance period for this family so that they could draw together what they needed and go through the probate process to make sure that they were able to do the work necessary on the property, because, of course, your owner of record is the person who's allowed to do the work. Now, I want to also bring your attention to the second picture, and that picture came many years after the initial complaint. A fire had been put out at this place. You have two structures at this site, and both of them, one was occupied by one of the family members. The other part of the main structure was significantly fire damaged. I did the inspection and found that the floors, ceilings, walls, none of this could be repaired. And we came upon a demolition order in our process, and I'm going round and round so that you'll get the fact that we start off requesting and trying to coordinate voluntary compliance. It takes some time. Things like this happen where fires that endanger neighbors and endanger the general community. Finally, we have Council District 5. This particular structure, we had a complaint filed in 2011. After that complaint was filed, we had several other complaints filed by the neighbors from 2011 all the way to 2019. In November 20th, an NREM complaint was reset to allow submittal of permit applications for the owners of this property. I skipped over the fact that we did have this property on our NREM agenda. We did arrive at a demolition order, and the owners did attend and participated and asked our consideration for giving them time to get permits, and so we did. So now, April 2021, we had to reset the hearing. This is something that happens from time to time when, due to different circumstances, we attempt to work with the owners. The owners have different circumstances, all of which are unique to the property and the objectives that they have for the property. And then in July 2021, an order of demolition was issued finally after 2 resets. Now, this is also a property with special other circumstances. The need for us to present this property, just as the need for the owner to present this property to the Urban Design Commission, which is a requirement for properties that are designated historic. And so after this hearing with them, which we kind of stood back because of all of the time that they had spent presenting their case to the Urban Design Commission for compliance and for guidance through the Historic Preservation Society. Today, at this time, these individuals have come to us and said, okay, now we want to sell it. We want to sell this property. We changed our mind. We have several other properties that we have, and this particular one is not necessarily a priority. And so they did come to our office to request removal of lis pendens. That is something that we will not do until full compliance is achieved. And so at this particular time, we are dealing with that particular circumstance with several properties. Not necessarily the Urban Design Commission, but the notion of a lis pendens standing so that we can gain compliance. So, now, in summary, in our administrative in-rem processes, we review our files. The investigative files are reviewed periodically, and we conduct our own internal audit of our files so that we make sure that we have everything in order, that all of those processes that we claim we do, we in fact do, and that we have proof of them. Properties are not monitored by us. Once we make an order, then those orders sit. The only way that we are prompted to follow through with those, one, due to the workflow and workload that we have, and secondly, in the fact that we are given the opportunity to owners to reach out to us to keep us informed. Because of our workload, there's opportunities for us to do follow-up with some properties, but ideally those where we are prompted to follow up and see the progress of the owners, we take that. All right, so we have common factors that are challenges for us. Individuals who do not accept their mail, they're not responsive. As mentioned in a previous case, you have probate challenges. Those probate challenges either deal with the process itself or the lack of the process, the lack of knowledge of the individual of that process and what it would take for them to actually take over and do what they need to do at any particular property. We have consideration of influencing factors for final action, mainly to achieve compliance. This is what we rely on. We rely on the public to take hold and do what they need to do for each and every one of these properties to avoid demolition, to avoid the city taking action in a situation where we have requested their action to comply themselves. We have, in the time frame of October 2020 to February 2022, we presented and got 238 orders from the NREM board. Out of that, 120 owners or parties in interest attended these hearings. Now I'm going to remind you, 238 orders and 120, which is less than half. Less than 20 took the advantage of what we have provided, what we've notified them of, the potential hearing, the orders in that particular order. And of those 238 orders, 18 of those properties changed hands prior to execution of any order that we may have had at the time for that property. And that is less than 10%. However, when they change ownership, they change ownership several times. It's just that we wanted to note to you that these properties are going to investors. The investors turn them over to other properties without doing the necessary work to bring those into compliance. They are able to avoid the lis pendens by having cash transactions for these properties, and then they have to sell to someone who needs who needs title insurance or who needs a loan, and that's where it stops. The lis pendens stops. So this final one, I think Ms. Talley will be speaking with you about the chart that we have listed here, but keep in mind, 238 properties, 120 people in attendance. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be open to question, and Ms. Talley will come.
Thank you, Ms. Lyles. We wanted to present this slide, and I'll be quick. We do internal audits of our investigative files periodically. This was an audit that was actually requested by our Administrative Interim Review Board. Because they had started providing more than 30 days to bring these properties into compliance, they wanted staff to do some research to determine whether or not it was effective in giving these property owners more than 30 days or upwards of 120 days to bring these properties into compliance. And what we found was that of those 202 demolition orders that were issued between January 2020 through May of 2021, 72 of those demolition orders received more than 30 days to comply. Less than 25% of those folks took advantage of that additional time and complied those properties, or progressing towards compliance by applying for permits to bring those properties into compliance. So again, less than 25% took advantage of that additional time. With that, I would like to bring up two of our board members that are here with us today, Mr. Brian Hooker, who is our current chair, as well as our former chair, Mr. Quill Healy.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I've was thinking about what I could say that might be of interest to y'all. I've served on this board since 2002 when Shirley Franklin first became mayor, and I've seen your interim process improve incredibly. From 2002 till the mid-2000s, the number of times that we had meetings canceled, or I even showed up for a meeting and they didn't happen, or we were not productive all during meetings was amazing. And we've evolved now into having an incredible staff who's very detailed, and we have a great board who's reliable to show up. We had 3 for a very long time, and if you didn't have 1 show up, then you had a problem. I guess we could have 2 to have a quorum, but anyway, we now have 5 very dependable board members. The entire process works very well, is very efficient. And the other thing that I thought would be important to say is that our number one interest is in protecting the neighborhoods and the city, but we have a very strong leaning and preference for the remedy to be handled by the owners of the properties. Every group or individual that shows up as an owner of the property is given as much time as we can possibly give them to explain their situation, and we would much prefer the owner of the property address the issues at hand. We really don't want to give it to the city to handle, because it's simply better for the owners to handle it. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I'll hand it over to the current chair.
Thank you, Quill. That's the former chair, Quill Healy. I am the current chair, Brian Hooker. And it's been 15 years since I've been on this board, and I've seen a lot of the transition that Quill was talking about. The thing that I want to leave you with is we let everyone know that we're taking action against property, not people. It's against property, not people. And many people come and they tell us people stories. And we listen and we engage and we try to elicit what we can to achieve that target that Quill talked about, which is for the owner to lead the way to compliance. But we have lots of different types of people that come to our hearings. We have, and you've seen examples of them, we have legacy owners, descendants, a lot of times who are dealing with a situation that hasn't been probated yet, and so they're limited as what they can do. We have people who invested and have sat on the properties, often for an extended period of time, because the market doesn't say it's time to invest in that property yet, and so they'll leave it there as long as they can. We have the investors that flip the properties, as you heard Ms. Lyles mention. And we are able to deal with these types of owners, but they're not the only people we deal with. We also hear testimony from the public, from their neighbors. And the neighbors tell us about criminal activity or concerns, for fire hazards going on in properties that are supposed to be vacant but have squatters in them. The neighbors tell us about the overgrown grass and the weeds and the concern about pests and rodents and actual rodents that they encounter. The neighbors tell us about their encounters with the owners and whether that owner is cooperative or in many cases makes promises that that owner doesn't keep. So we get to hear testimony from those folks as well. We encourage pictures, visual testimony from the owners. Sometimes an owner will take pictures that are more recent than the pictures that were taken and shown us by code enforcement. So all of this gives us a picture of what's really going on. We ask the owners, what are your plans for the property? Non-leading question. And they will tell us, oh, we just want to sell it. Or we intend to fix it up because another family member wants to move in. They will tell us what their intentions are. We will ask them, okay, do you have the means to fix this up? How would you pay for it? And what kind of time would you need? So we introduced the compliance period specifically so that we could ask owners, how much time do you need? And then try to give them that time because, again, we would prefer to see the owner bring the property into compliance rather than using the limited city funds. But the reality is, by the time a property has gotten to us, it's like a child going to the principal's office. There's some disciplining that needs to be involved. There's been some neglect, there's been some non-compliance, and these properties have been in that condition usually for a long while. When neighbors come, they are frustrated. They're frustrated that it has taken so long for the property to get to this point. And we tell them in all honesty that just because we've issued a demolition order doesn't mean it's going to be taken care of. The neighbors want to see things happen faster. The neighbors want to see things be effective. So our role is to get a good resolution for the property. And for us, the ideal resolution is bring it into compliance, bring it back into productive use in the city, or leading to demolition. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is, in many cases, we always ask, okay, owner, the city is recommending demolition. Do you agree with that order? You'd be surprised how many of them say yes. They agree that the property needs to come down. So what happens is every now and then you have someone who tells us a personal and heartfelt story about the ownership of the property, and there's a sentimental value. In other cases, you have value disparity. Remember, Ms. Talley testified that they used the structural value from the county tax records. Well, in this real estate market, we recognize that that may not be the most accurate value of the property. So there are some cases where there's been a demolition order where the owner, under sworn testimony, gives us an alternate value. We assess that as a board and determine whether we agree or not, in which case we might lower the order from demolition to clean and close. So we have some flexibility, but what I want to leave you with is ultimately we are engaging with people to see what we can do to take action against the property on behalf of the neighbors and the citizens of Atlanta. So I am grateful that this body appointed me years ago to serve in this role. I enjoy it. I'm really pleased, as well as our former chair, with the way we've seen the staff evolve over the years, the way the meetings have become more efficient, more effective, and I am now, Ms. Lyles also acted with incredulity that only 50% of the orders had property owners attend. We're actually thrilled at that. We remember the days where 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7 would show up. And I'm a little concerned that we're going to drop again in our numbers when we move back to a virtual environment. So if there's some way you all can work with the state and the Open Meetings Act to figure out a way to have hybrid or something so that we get more attendance. We love having the owners attend, the neighbors attend, so that we can really deal with these issues. So thank you. And Quill and I, if you had any questions for us, we're here to answer.
All right, thank you for that. Deputy Director Talley or Deputy Chief, you want to close us out, and then we'll move to questions about the APD code enforcement before we move to fire.
So again, thank you for having us. I think the common theme up there is just that there's a check and balance system involved in this process, and that this process is labor intensive. The only part that I think Deputy Director Talley failed to mention was the number of hours her people put in working a particular property, whether that property goes to demolition or whether it goes to compliance. For each and every property you see, there's like a ton of man hours that go into that property to bring it in compliance or take it to demolition. So I just want to make this board aware of it, and also the citizens aware of that. You know, every single property, we're putting in hundreds of hours of manpower on that property. So it is not something that we want to do. It is something that is demanded of us from our constituents, from people of the community, and quite frankly, from the members of this board here. So thank you all for having us. Council President Shipman, the rest of you all, thanks for having us. And for the members that weren't here that would like a one-on-one presentation, just have them reach out to myself or Deputy Director Talley, and we'll be more than happy to sit down with them and go through this process again, because I think it's important that everybody understands the process. So thank you all.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Tyus. Thank you, Deputy Director Talley, Ms. Lyles, and Mr. Healy and Mr. Hooker for your testimony here today. It was very valuable. I'm going to defer to my colleagues first, and then I'll have some questions and comments. First up is Councilmember Boone. Anyone else with questions?
Thank you all so much for this presentation. I do have a couple of questions regarding, thank you, Mr. Hooker, for being here. You have served on this board 15 years.
Yes.
And are there term limits on this board? How are you all chosen?
We are nominated by the mayor's administration, and then we go before a committee for official confirmation, but we have to be voted on in full council. My understanding is that the initial term was 3 years, but there's an automatic rollover provision. And so we are able to continue to serve until someone is appointed to replace us.
Okay, so you've been on the board 15 years.
Yes.
And you've been on the board, sir, 20 years? 20 years. What about the other members of this board?
So of the 5 that are currently serving, we have 2 others who joined around the time that I did.
So they've been on 15 years
about 15 years. And then we have one that we were able to beg and plead to get the Reed administration to appoint. So she's been on for, is this her 4th year? Third year.
So 3 people have been on 15 years, 1 20 and 1 3 or 4 years? Yes. Okay, thank you. And I do have a couple of other questions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ms. Talley, how many properties have been through the interim process in the last 3 years?
We've probably, actually, I think I have that data with me. So in FY 2020, we demolished 100, FY 21, 55, and so far this year, 51.
How many of those came into compliant, and how many have been demolished?
So about 200 demolished, and of those, I don't have that data of the ones that came into compliance, but that last slide that we showed, I think there were 202 orders that had been issued between February of 2020 and May of 21. 25% of those were complied.
Okay. How many times, so we want to help you all. What can we do to make sure that folks are not citizens, especially the elderly, are calling us saying that they haven't been notified and they had not received the certified mail. What other ways can we come up with to try to let folks know that they're in danger of losing their property? Because I know you all have exhausted all. By the time we get there, you all have cited them several times by the time they get the certified notice.
So if they call our office, because first we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence, that we have sent notifications, A, to the rightful owner, and B, to the proper address. And then we want to have a conversation with them, as Chair Hooker stated, that, if they have funding in place, we want to ask those questions. Do you have funding to bring the property into compliance? Because a lot of times, even after the expiration of that order has taken place and you're still having those conversations, they do not have the resources to bring those properties into compliance. And unfortunately, our office, what we're doing, we're the enforcement agency, we're the enforcement arm, and so we are protecting, the health, safety, and health of the community. So we are trying to eliminate that highly hazardous condition or that blight. So we don't have the funding to say, hey, here's the funding to replace the roof, to replace the plumbing. But at least contact our office, because again, A, we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence, and then B, have that conversation to see what are your plans. Let's see if we can give you additional time on top of the additional time that we've already given you.
So I am just looking at one specific concern in the Adamsville community on Bakers Ferry Road. Ms. Jacobs' daughter, Ms. Jacobs, 84 years old, 85 years old, had fallen ill, was placed in a nursing home. So all of the notices were going to an empty home. Daughter lives in Florida, and they come back and the Demolition, and you all were so kind enough to work with that family. You all did work with them, but I am concerned about those that may fall through the crack. And because a lot of times children are just not as interested in keeping the air property as their parents are. Just trying to make sure we can either talk to neighbors and find out if an inspector goes to a door, knocks, and nobody's there. Just additional layers of support for these families so that we can find them.
And before a case is actually submitted for administrative in-rem consideration, that portion is done on that, I believe that was slide number 3, the inspections workflow. So when if the address that we find is the address of the property that we know is vacant, then our research team will do additional research to see if we can find and locate relatives and make those calls to see. And as you stated, the contacts that we make, the kids are not interested. They do not want to deal with that. They don't want the headache of that blight. So we do make that attempt even before it comes over to the administrative in-rem proceedings.
Okay. Also, what do...
And you don't know that address, do you? But you said we've already resolved the issue. Or
you all were so kind enough to meet with that family, and you all did come up with some type of resolution.
Oh, great.
How many homes are currently in the process now? And do you feel like you're adequately staffed enough? We are here to give you all and support you all because we're talking about property. And it's very, very serious.
Yes.
So are you staffed properly?
No. To answer your question, no. I think right now your caseload is upwards of 600, nearly 600 cases. And it changes daily.
Tell me, what does your staff look like? Tell me.
The compliance resolution team or the entire
just
structure?
the inspectors and everything. I mean, what?
So,
how many? I know, I see y'all. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your hard work.
So inspectors, boots on the ground, and this is not this team. These are our inspectors. We have 13, and 3 of them are very, very new. And these are the inspectors that are going out prior to these cases transferring over to compliance resolution. Once we get to compliance resolution, we have 2 current housing demolition officers that are doing these types of inspections throughout the city.
Only two?
Only two on this particular team that is doing these types of violations. We did get a question. You guys also receive a copy of the agenda 1 week prior to each hearing, and there was a time we would have 25 to 30 cases on that agenda, and now we're down to 10, and that is because we're trying to train. The two officers that we have are not new to code enforcement, but they are new to compliance resolution. So Ms. Lyles herself was newly promoted last summer to this role. Again, not new to code enforcement or compliance resolution, but as a manager. So she's trying to train them to get that agenda back up to 25 to 30 cases a month.
So years back, council members would get a list of what districts would be MREM. What happened to that list?
We're going to start providing that again, I believe, once a quarter.
When did that stop?
It didn't. I think the last report we sent in January. I think we presented before Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee, and we provided that report of the demolitions that had been executed by district, as well as those that had been awarded to the city contractor. So the last one was January, and we're going to...
I would definitely like for all members to get that, so that they will know what's going on in their prospective districts.
Sure.
And I'm not going to prolong this because we can always do a one-on-one, but 793 Laurelmont Drive Southwest off of Benjamin E. Mays Drive, 793 Laurelmont Drive. If you would follow up with that property and just get back with me. So thank you all so much.
Will do. Thank you.
Councilman Ramus.
General question and then a statement. NREM, property against action. Action against property. So if the action against the property, I heard that you made a statement that somewhere between the posting and the selling and the order, they are able to sell. So why doesn't the process still carry forward although the property has been sold?
So you're stating between the initial inspection and the NREM hearing, or
the property purchase post filing of a list pending and issuance of the order?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So we can still proceed, and so the point we were trying to make is some of the calls that we received saying that they weren't notified is because you purchased the property after the list pendants was filed, after the title examination had been performed. So you were not listed as an owner. You became that owner after the fact. So action against property does allow us to proceed because that order transfers from owner to owner.
Okay. And the statement is really to the chairman of the board. Ms. Talley was asked the question, was the department properly funded? Our employees are City of Atlanta employees, and they operate inside of that. But you as NREM members appointed by the mayor are citizens. What I'm looking for is for the board or someone to step. The system is broken, not because the process is not working. It's broken because we still have open, dilapidated housing and structures in the city, all rampant throughout the city. So the system is broken when it comes to my residents who walk outside and see that. What I need from you is, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? What paper we need to submit? Which one of our elected colleagues on the county, the state, or even a national level? We need to do something because the process is working for the process, but it's not working for the people. And that's what we need to, and not really Ms. Talley or even Deputy Chief Collier, that we need the people that is in the process. You appointed people to speak to us, to let us know what we need to do to help you, to help Ms. Talley and the police and code enforcement to get this done.
Councilmember, thank you so much. That's exactly why we're here and why we were excited to participate in this work session, because there's a throughput issue. We are at a point where we are handling what comes before us, but the process of what leads into that. Even Ms. Talley mentioned they've slowed down, and we've noticed it. We, as a board, when we reinitiated these hearings, we went to twice monthly so that we could catch up on what we thought was going to be a huge backlog. Normally, 40 or 50 properties would be a good size for a hearing, and we knew there were 150 out there. So we are willing to step up, but it's the input side. So what can we do? I've heard folks express concern that there's not enough interim activity happening in their particular district. That council member isn't here. But how do we ramp up that front end, the inspections? How do we look at the process to determine, is there a trigger that could get it to us faster? I mean, it's frustrating when we see first complaint filed in 2014, and here it is in 2022. So that's telling us that somehow it's not getting to us fast enough. And we want to be part of what those possibilities are. We've had, as a board, we've called in legal on multiple occasions to brief us on what we could do to enhance the process and how, where our limitations are in terms of our ability to change an order or do something different than what the city has recommended. But in terms of that input, we'd love to be at the table talking about how we increase the throughput while continuing to respect the property rights of the owners.
And that's good. And very quickly, Mr. Chair, that's good. So after legal gave you your recommendations, if it is a city ordinance that needs to be changed, we need to know. If it's something on the county side, I would like to know, or state, because you guys are doing fabulous work. But for the person that walks out and still see these structures, not you guys, the city of Atlanta is not doing anything. So that's what I need. That's what I would prefer. What do we need to change where we can, influence where we can to make the city look better than what we're doing?
Councilman, we'd be happy to work with you, Council President, Mr. Chairman, all of you on that. Thank you for that statement.
Other colleagues, questions? Councilmember Waits.
Again, I want to echo the statement and thank you for the work that you're doing. I grew up in the city and I have seen over the years the challenges with blighted property. And as a former landlord and property owner, I'm grateful. There is a subtle conversation that is happening specific to 12. And by the way, Ms. Laus, thank you for the recent support you provided to the family that was living next to one of the properties that you referenced. And I've worked for years with Mr. Hooker. But there is a subtle suggestion that given the recent rise in property values near the Tyler Perry Studios, that there is an interest by developers and that there may be some aggressive code enforcement happening in these communities because they're economically distressed and that these families may not have access to legal counsel, so forth. So one, the data that Councilmember Boone referenced, I'd love to see that broke down by the district. And secondly, I know you mentioned that once we make contact with the property owner, so in the event that we're dealing with a probate issue or a senior issue or a situation like this, what is the turnaround time frame once you get a hold of someone who is interested in complying? How much time do you give them to comply?
So it depends on where we are. If it has made it on the agenda for city abatement, again, you have the board that is giving them upwards of 220 days to bring the property into compliance. And when we say bring the property into compliance, we know for a fact that 120 days on some of the properties that you saw is not enough time. And what we're asking them to do within that 120 days is to at least start the process. So if it is on an agenda, we are asking you to start the process by requesting a payoff, because again, we would like to be reimbursed for the services we've provided thus far. And once you do that, then we are going to give you the required document that you need to apply for a permit. So once they start that process, and our staff that's another responsibility that they have to track those permits, because what we find, and on that last slide, what you saw was folks heard, well, if I apply for a permit, the process stops, and I'm going to walk away for 6 months. We want you to continue that process, because what we don't want for you to do is cut the grass, board it up with plywood, and then walk away, sit and wait. So if it takes you 6 months to get that permit, we are going to work with you as long as that permit is progressing.
Okay.
Yes.
And I know that, once they hit that particular state, that it's extremely difficult to get any type of funding or, resources to make those repairs. Is there consideration given to people who may be in economically distressed situations that do want to hold on to the property?
We do, and would you like to address that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So again, that is one of the questions that we ask. And if it is going to take time for those resources, it depends on the situation. We, again, try to work with folks, but so many are saying we do not have the resources. We do not know where to start. If there's some information we can provide, we do. But again, we're looking at that property that is unsecured, and it's been unsecured for years. We're looking at it. The neighbors are looking at it. So at some point, the city has got to eliminate that blight. We've got to eliminate that threat from the community. But we do, again, try to engage these property owners, listen to the challenges that they have, and we go from there.
And finally, the notion that somehow communities such as District 12 that have recently seen a rise in property values, that there may be some aggressive code enforcement due to interest from developers to purchase.
So again, the majority of our complaints, and I'm going to say about 94% of our complaints are filed through the call center, ATL 311. The rest of those are proactive. Those when the officers are out and they are looking at a property across the street where a complaint was filed, and they look across the street and see another violation. So that becomes a proactive complaint. Can I stand here and say to you that investors are not calling in these complaints? I can't. We're not sure who's calling in these complaints, but every complaint that is filed, we have to respond. And again, before it even is considered for interim abatement, we are trying to engage the property owners to see what is going on, what time do they need. We give extensions on the front end when those courtesy notices are mailed. We're giving you 30 days. If you need 60, 90 days to repair your roof, we're going to give you that. It is not our goal to tear down these homes. We would rather have a structure there, because what we found many, many years ago when the funding for these projects increased was that we had a lot of vacant lots. And what happens at these vacant lots? They become overgrown, and folks start dumping on these vacant lots. And so then the citizens are looking to us to maintain those lots. So we prefer not to have that. But at the same time, we know that we've got to eliminate that threat that has been sitting in that community for years.
Okay. And again, the notion that somehow these properties are cherry-picked due to interest by developers, you would say that's not true?
That is not true.
Okay. Thank you.
And Councilmember, thank you for asking those questions. Chair, if I may, one of the things we've talked about here is how do we improve the process going forward? There are a couple of policy areas that I would encourage you to look at. One is, how do we deal with the boarded up properties? So it's one thing to come to us, this board, gotten through all of that, finally got to us. The property is less than 50% deteriorated, so we issue a clean and close order so the city boards up the property. Well, then what? I believe the ordinance says the property is only allowed to stay legally boarded for 6 months. Ride around this city and see how real that is. So resources to address that existing ordinance and try to enforce it are way beyond what is available here to this team, but that's something we need to look at. Also, you all are familiar with home improvement grant programs that have in the past been run by Invest Atlanta. Now, I'm not sure if the right thing to do is to have a program that when somebody's property has gotten so bad, we start notifying them about it. But again, it is, when it's a family, it's the lack of funding and a lot of times a lack of proper title that prevents them from being able to move forward with the repairs. So partnering with Invest Atlanta to figure out a way to provide some funding could be helpful as well. Then the other thing from a policy standpoint is, Ms. Talley just mentioned, we demolished the property, okay? It's gone. Now you got a lot. that just grows up from time to time. The board asked legal, what steps could the city take to get that property back into productive use? And we were concerned that the horrible eminent domain would need to be used, but legal came back and said, well, with the lien, you can use a simple foreclosure to get the property and get it into the hands of the Land Bank Authority, and then have a program. I know Invest Atlanta also has had a vacant lot program where affordable housing developers can come and bid on a group of lots, a group of individual lots, and build houses there, where you got that land value now significantly reduced by this process. Well, imagine all of the properties that have gone through in-rim demolition, and specifically done by the city where there's a lien, going through that process so they can come back to productive use. That's something that we have talked about before, and have heard a little bit that there's been some progress on that, but would love for you all to dig into that, because if you all dig into it, it's going to happen. Thank you.
I want to recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Overstreet. Welcome. Anyone else with questions? And I just want to give a few statements and talk about some of the things that I heard about. So, number one, Ms. Talley talked about, in 2010, this was a one-woman show, she said, and that's about when I got involved in my neighborhood, and honestly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the code enforcement issues that I saw in my neighborhood, and wanted to take action by joining my neighborhood board, get involved with my MPU work for my predecessor, specifically focused on public safety and code enforcement. So I've had, 11 years of experience now, much to Ms. Talley's chagrin, and addressing these properties in my district and across District 9. So I've seen a whole lot, and there is much room for improvement, but as was mentioned, we've come a long way. I believe it was one of Mr. Healy who mentioned we've come a long way from where we were just 10 years ago when this division was under planning. There was a very scathing audit back in, 2009?
2010.
And they transitioned, one of the fixes was transitioning code enforcement to APD. And again, they've come a long way, not only with the process, but also increasing those demolitions, and seen a lot of progress, but much more progress to be made, as was mentioned. Also want to address, the lack of notice, especially when it comes to investors. I've had investors call me wanting help to get out from under this impending in-rem hearing or a demo order that's already been issued, and I tell them, if you would have done your due diligence, you would have found that the code enforcement issue on this property has been going on since 2010, 2011, through a title search or looking through the city's publicly available system where you can look up code enforcement information. So always defer those to code enforcement to make that decision, but I just have a hard time when investors are coming into neighborhoods in my district like Grove Park, Center Hill, purchasing properties for $50,000, $60,000, then looking to sell them for $300,000 by putting, as I said, lipstick on a pig, and causing gentrification in these neighborhoods. I'll share a few success stories and what I've seen. I know I was mentioning how thankful neighbors are when these demolitions finally occur. One of the most memorable ones for me was before I was a council member, and I worked for my predecessor, is in Collier Heights on Vanetta Place. You remember that one, Ms. Talley?
Yes.
And just the neighbors that came out, seniors in the Collier Heights neighborhood, that were just so thankful to finally see this nuisance property get demolished, the junk vehicle towed away. And then one of the largest, or the largest demolition in the city's history was a number of apartments right at myself and Councilmember Boone's district border on Bolton Road that cost the city millions of dollars that Fulton County had subparceled out into, 70-something plus parcels.
About 100, actually.
With many, many different owners. So that took a lot of work and a lot of time from code enforcement, but thankfully that blight is gone now. And then wanted to also, just been brought up a little bit about the NREM. And so just wanted to make sure that it's clear, as some have stated, that NREM it literally means against a thing. We're not taking people's properties. We're taking care of a thing, a open and vacant structure, and then getting back our cost that it costs the city to demolish that structure and fix that blight. And so on that point, I wanted to, you didn't talk very much about numbers, and there's some questions about budgeting and things like that, and they'll be about to go into budget hearings, but talk about your current budget, kind of how that's divided in between, staffing, and about how much you all have been getting each year for demolitions, CDBG funding, and how that is tied to certain spend dates, and talk about some numbers for us.
So all of our funding sources, there is a timeline or a deadline, spending deadline that's tied to it. General fund, I would say since 2014 or 15, we've received $2 million for demolition projects. Prior to that, it was about $170,000 each year from the general fund. CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant, they tell us that money is not guaranteed every year. We've been pretty fortunate to receive anywhere from $700,000 to $1 million each year for abandoned and vacant structures. The deadline is generally the end of each calendar year, but sometimes we can get an extension on that. I will say that generally we do not need an extension. That money is usually spent by summer, but because of the pandemic and the protocols put in place for applying for building permits, we do have some funding left over for that. So we anticipate that we will receive an additional $2 million from the general fund, and hopefully, again, another $700,000 to $1 million for CDBG projects.
Thanks for that. And just to close out, so a few more things. I've just done some quick math here, and I believe Ms. Lyle said there's 500 plus
yes.
in the bin to come through in REM. Even if we figured if all of those were recommended for demolition, which of course they won't be.
Right.
And I believe demos, at least a few years ago, they may have went up for about 20 or so thousand.
So we got that, yeah. So the average cost now for a single family wood frame structure is around $15,000.
15?
15,000,
okay.
yes.
So give or take, if we just address those and that bin that is going to be coming through, that's a little under $10 million.
Yes.
And there are many more out there that haven't been put into that NREM bin yet. So that is something I'm dedicated to work on, as I have before, in finding some additional demolition money. But then also looking over the housing code, as you mentioned, it's from '87, which
yes.
is only 2 years younger than I am. So it may need some updating. So I'll dedicate myself to look through that and see what we can come up with to expedite this process, but also ensure that those protections are there for the owners and the residents, that they get proper notification, and they're given, as the board mentioned, when I first started attending these hearings almost 10 years ago now, there were no owners almost that showed up.
Right.
So that grace period wasn't given, but I have sometimes, to my frustration, have seen those grace periods where you all are giving, additional 30, 60, 90, up to 120 days for them to bring those properties in compliance. So I think that shows the willingness of the board and code enforcement to work with those owners that do show up and at least say they want to take responsibilities for their properties. And hopefully we see more of that, because as was mentioned, that's how we want it to occur. We don't want to do it ourselves because, at least as the process goes now, again, this is NREM against a thing, those properties still stay in those same owners' names, whether there's a demo or a clean and close, and then 6 months later, we have an overgrown lot, or we have a home that is still boarded and a tree may have fallen through it. So now it's got to go back through NREM and get demolished. So there are some changes that are needed, and we definitely want to see the process sped along. Certainly in my district, and I know my colleagues, a handful of my colleagues, their districts really need help. So that's something we're looking forward to. Councilmember Overstreet.
Yeah, so first of all, sorry I'm late. That's why I'm not going to ask very many questions. I'm going to study my presentation. I had a meeting at the same time in my office, but I will ask this because I made sure with Boone that this wasn't asked already. Want to know how many vacancies are on the NREM board? Who appoints that board? What are the guidelines, as far as how long people serve? Does city council appoint? Just some information about that.
Okay. I'm going to answer that, but also in that booklet, we included the housing code, and it is in Article 3, I believe, Section 33, and it talks about the qualifications of the NREM Review Board. So, but currently there is a 5-member board, and the current code says that they can serve for a period of 3 years. But there is, I believe the law department is here and may be able to share. I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. Good morning. Amber A. Robinson, City Department of Law. Pursuant to Section 31 of the Housing Code, the NREM board members are nominated by the mayor and confirmed by council, and they serve in 3-year terms.
Yes.
So, and it's a 5-member board?
It is currently, yes.
And how often do they meet?
Monthly.
Okay. So, and you say city council does not have an appointment?
No, the appointees are all nominated by the mayor, but there is a requirement that they all be confirmed by council.
Okay. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to kind of update that charter, so that we can be included and have people in the communities that really would be able to help the whole process, have more of a say in what the community, how we, clean and help our communities. So I'll be looking into that. And, that's it. Thank you all for being here today. I am going to do my homework.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Colleagues, any other questions for code enforcement? They'll stick around. We'll come back to some discussion and next steps after we hear from our others and from the public. But thank you all very much. And at this time, we'll move to fire rescue, as I thought they were a very important part of this, and that the number of open and vacant structures the city has, we frequently see in the news where these open and vacant structures catch fire. There was, I believe, just 2 that I know about in the past couple weeks. One in my district, one I believe in Councilmember Amos's district. And in one of those, the firefighters, fell through the floor, and that's not a first occurrence. That unfortunately occurs often. So I wanted to bring them in to talk about their role in this, what they are seeing out there in the trenches. And so we have Deputy Chief Alan Burton and Assistant Chief Detrick Cummings from Atlanta Fire Rescue. You will come up and do your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, members of council, the public. I would like to thank you for allowing us to come in to present today. I'm joined here by my Deputy Chief, Alan Burton. My name is Detrick Cummings. I serve as an Assistant Chief and the Fire Marshal for the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department. As you could tell from Code Enforcement's presentation, the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department does not have an active role in the NREM process. However, we are involved in activities that indirectly affect this process in certain ways. So in in 2021, January, to be more in line with the state guidelines for reporting incidents, the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department changed its record management system over from Embers to ImageStream. When we were in Embers, we would generate a report, a quarterly report that would be sent over to code enforcement, and inside of this report, it listed every fire call that we had to structures. It told whether the structure was vacant and secured or vacant unsecured. I'm sorry. Control. Okay. So this report that we sent over to code enforcement, it identified all of the fires that we had at these at locations, and it identified and told whether this structure was vacant and secured, vacant and unsecured, operating normally, or if it was under construction. So we have corrected that issue. Now we are reporting those incidents to code enforcement, and it was only discovered on March 29th of 2022, which was last month, upon an investigation of a fire death that we had on Joseph E. Boone. So looking back at the data, we've noticed that there have been 62 structure fires since the first quarter of 2021 to current. That is an unacceptable number. And let me note, this is a good process at identifying vacant and unsecured structures, but it is a reactive process. I would like, from a fire rescue's perspective, to share with you a proactive approach that we're currently taking, and is supported by our Fire Prevention Code 78-57, Section 311. It authorizes the fire department to placard any building that we have determined to be unsafe, unsecured, or uninhabitable by humans. And that's Section 311 of the Fire Prevention Code. This process is ongoing, and right now it uses a two-color card system, which is illustrated here on the board. We have a green placard. The green placards are used for firefighters to let them know that the building is dangerous to enter and that some of the structural integrity may have been compromised. The red placards are used to let firefighters know that the building is unsafe and that there's identifiable hazards in the building and into its structural integrity. We've been using the code for years to placard buildings, but we're not using the code in its entirety. If we read further down into the code, it tells us that we should be sending out letters to any building that we placard and getting in contact with the owners to have them to secure the building and to make the building safe. As a fire department, we are committed to being in more communication with code enforcement and making sure that they know about these buildings that we placard so that we can not only save lives, keep people safe, and prevent fires and structures of this sort. And if you have any questions about our involvement in the interim process, I'd be more than happy to answer your questions.
Colleagues, any questions for Atlanta Fire Rescue on how they're involved in this process? Councilmember Amos?
I do have one question for fire, and then I'm glad to see Ms. Talley here. So when fire placards up property that's probably Housing Code has already been to, do they give us additional powers to do anything different with the property, or do you run into the same headaches that they run into notifying the owners and things of that nature? Because I'm figuring if fire is involved, now it's a true public safety issue. Do that open up another level of the law, or where do we stand with that?
So it really depends. If the integrity of the building, let's just say, for instance, if the structure is going to fall or collapse onto the right-of-way or to adjoining properties, then we engage the Department of City Planning Office of Buildings, because that is the building code official, and so they can bring a building down immediately without any type of formal proceeding. But generally, if they're we communicate with each other. They may send us, fire may send us an email asking if we can assist with ownership research for those properties. We send that to them, and then our process also starts. But again, if it is going to fall, if that immediate threat is going to fall onto the right-of-way or adjoining properties, then we will contact the Office of Buildings.
Okay.
So that scenario changes in that aspect.
Well, thank you. And then another thing, and I reach out for a one-on-one, but also what I would like to know, and my colleague, Councilwoman Boone, alluded to it a little bit. What are, if there are, if we need to put any protections in the code for our elderly legacy property owners who unfortunately may have some codes? So what protections can we put in that in the code to protect them if they doesn't exist already? So we mention that at a later date.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions, colleagues? Councilmember Lewis?
And following up on what Councilmember Amos said, when you think about is there a way for them to remedy some of these things, and when do we offer? I know the board member, he said earlier that that they talk to folks and they say, how are you going to pay for this? How much money do you have? When do we offer them our funding? Because he mentioned, I know it's recorded, he said the little bit of money that we have, we try to use it later, but why don't we offer first?
So for APD code enforcement, our funding that is allocated to us is for the abatement and not repairing. So the program that I'm familiar with most is, before it gets to the end state, is the DEV program through the Solicitor's Office for the disabled, elderly, and veterans. But the property has to be occupied. They have to live in the property. There are those restrictions, the age limit, income, and again, they have to reside in those properties. The properties that we are dealing with that comes through this particular proceeding, again, they are vacant. They are abandoned. Yes.
So, but the reason why why we put this together was because some of my folks were actually calling me because they weren't never offered. They didn't even know these other things were out there. I know I talked to you about it in person. You said we have to first tell them that they've broken the code. And I'm thinking of someone in my district by the name of Susie Mae Mitchell. Susie Mae Mitchell, she right now she's having a fight for her roof. She has a grandson, Terrell Aldridge, because I don't like speaking about people we don't know. I want to be very specific in my district. And Susie, she got code enforcement sent her a letter that says she had, or not, if not code enforcement, someone sent her a letter that says she needs to fix her roof to bring it up to code. She's a 77-year-old woman who didn't have the funding for this. She has a grandson who lives in some apartments in my district as well, lives in Pittsburgh. She lives off Cleveland Avenue. He lives in Pittsburgh. He's also a mechanic. He's like a person who fixes things. So he immediately starts saving up his entire income tax, because this house will be passed down to him. And he came to this city council person like, hey, how can we help? How do we get this going? I said, hey, first you have to be fined by code enforcement. He looked into that. I mean, not fined, you have to be...
Right. So for the DEV program to qualify, you have to have an active citation with municipal court. Yes.
But he has 30 days to get it up to code.
Yes.
And so the process, he said that process takes too long for him to actually receive the funding. So he legit just used his income taxes to pay for his grandmother's roof. So what I'm asking is, why don't we offer first when those situations come, because he don't know this stuff exists, and we trying to do a workaround like, hey, I got to get you in trouble first.
Right.
Or do we need to change the code up here?
So if she received a notice from us and we offer 30 days to comply, we look to those property owners or relatives to call to tell us what's going on. We can provide an extension. We are willing to work. We are, again, willing to offer those resources that we're familiar with, not from our office, but if we are aware of any programs out there that we can share with them, then we will do so. Just currently, there are not as many out there, and the programs that are out there, funding is very, very limited.
So my thing is, when we say that if it's less than 50% of what the house costs, when I heard the board member say earlier that we then listen to how they're going to come up with funding, my whole thing is, if we see that this person doesn't have the funding, why don't we offer the little money that we do have? Because it's not ours, right? It's the taxpayers' money.
Yeah, but so we're talking about two different things. So in the scenario that you're using, this is not an in-rem property. This property appears to be occupied.
Yep, occupied.
So this property is not going to end up on this list. So the properties that end up on this list are abandoned and vacant.
I was going to go back to that list too. So I have a specific example about that. I'm the example for that person, right?
Okay.
I was going to do that one next.
Okay.
I'm the example for that person.
Okay.
My grandmother, we owned the property, and my great-grandfather bought it. We owned it for about 35 years. I actually went and got it back myself before, because I'm thinking about the code enforcement process. And I still have pictures that I can show to everybody of when they actually came and put the placards on the house. Mm-hmm. But before they put the placards on the house, seniors in our districts, this is why they're calling us so much, because they're getting calls from people developers trying to buy the house, and then they got a letter from you saying that they have to pay, not from code enforcement, saying they have to pay a certain amount of money to keep it up to par. My grandmother ran. She didn't, because the letter said you had a 30-day, because misinformation from developers plus information coming from y'all. So she ran and left the house. 5 years later, the house was torn down, and I bought the taxes back. So I'm just wondering, how do we fix some of these situations? How do we work with the folks that we know need it?
So again, if your grandmother received that notice and she lived in that house, contacting us, you, as the grandson, could contact us and say, hey, she's living in the house. We want to maintain this house. What can we do? And at that time, that gives us an opportunity to reach out to our counterparts. We used to be able to work I'd say we used to have a good relationship with the Department of City Planning, the Housing Division, because they had programs. Same thing, very similar to the DEV program, where if funding was available, they could replace a roof. They could paint a house. They could do those things. So we will generally reach out to those folks, or have those folks reach out to those other departments or those other agencies for assistance. And as long as that is happening, we are not, again, interested in issuing citations to someone. We will provide an extension, because more than likely a complaint was filed for your grandmother's roof. But we want to work with your grandmother to bring these properties into compliance. So I hate that she left her property, and again, it became abandoned. It probably became a safe haven for squatters. And that's how it ended up on the demolition list.
And I think I want to follow it up by District 12 has... folks in District 12 feel like our community has been targeted since Tyler Perry moved over. Because we talk about how 311, you said the number one way you're receiving calls through 311. When I met with 311, they say they don't get calls from District 12 residents. Mm-hmm. We had a meeting with with Commissioner Josh Rowland, and he said there were 22 potholes in the city, but they weren't getting any calls from District 12 residents. So when you say that we see houses are coming down in our district, and you say people are using 311 to get it torn down, people in my district feel that since the Tyler Perry Studios came up, developers are calling and reporting these homes. Then they're tearing it down.
So, anybody can call in a complaint. I can live in another state and call in a complaint. But we also have, our officers are also they're conducting field-generated or area inspections. So if a complaint was not filed with 311 or through our office directly, an officer could have been driving by and at a property across the street or next door and see a blatant violation, and they will write it up themselves. So, I don't know who's calling in the complaints. Most of the complaints that we see, if I go into an actual complaint in Excella, which is our database, that complainant is anonymous. So I can't determine who generally files a complaint unless they leave their information.
Councilmember Westmoreland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your presentation and the clearly competent way you do your work. I have a question for law. I share Councilmember Lewis's desire to use the resources we have to help folks make improvements to their homes. And so my favorite question for law is always like how we do that, not whether we can or not, but like how we legally figure out how to do it. And could you talk, it seems like the two ways that come to my mind are, one, with the Housing Opportunity Bond money, we do loans, but like over time, the loans kind of turn into grants as long as someone stays in their home long enough. And then second, I know we've done work, we've partnered with nonprofits in the past where we can make a donation to a nonprofit who can then go do work, but you got to like ensure you're not crossing a line into the gratuities clause. So could you like just talk a little bit about how we can do what we all want to do?
Sure, thank you. So in regards to the use of the housing opportunity bonds pursuant to the legal qualifications regarding the use of such funds would govern the use of the housing opportunity bonds for that or other purposes which are permissible under the law. In regards to the sort of direct payments that were suggested from the city directly to improve certain properties, we would need to do so partnering with any sort of nonprofit, as we are permitted, we are prohibited from providing direct payments or direct services to an individual in order to improve their properties, or to give funds towards the improvement of properties pursuant to the state's Constitution's gratuities clause. But if we are able to identify a nonprofit or an agent or an outside agency that is providing that sort of service, that's a 501c3, then there's an opportunity for the city to be able to partner with such an entity and possibly provide a donation pursuant to our charter to said agency, which could then in turn, as part of its mission, provide said assistance. But we do not have the ability to provide that sort of direct assistance.
Thank you, Councilmember. Again, this is fire, so if anyone has specific questions for AFRD before we move on, any further questions for fire?
Is there a appeals process? What's the appeal process like once a house is in that stage to where we're about to demolish it? What's the appeal process like?
So in Section 67 of the Housing Code, it kind of spells out the appeals process. So for a demolition order, within 30 days of filing of that demolition order, the owner can appeal to the director of the code enforcement section.
And that's the only person they can appeal to?
So if the code enforcement director, if the response is not what they like, then they can, I think the code further goes into appealing to municipal court judge and then subsequently, if need to Superior Court.
And if they, outside of that 30-day window, then what happens? If they miss that 30-day window, day 31.
So I'm actually going to ask my great friends over in the law department if they could respond to that.
The time for appeal is controlled statutorily, and so it is, as Ms. Talley states, 30 days, and then after that they can go to the municipal court, and thereafter, and that appeal must be filed within 30 days, and thereafter, if they're aggrieved by the decision of the municipal court, they have an opportunity to appeal that pursuant to state law to Superior Court. The time for appeal being statutorily controlled are not anything that we have discretion over. And so if the time for the appeal is missed, then the earlier decision does in fact stand.
You just ask your question into the mic, Councilmember Lewis.
So even if this is, I think, is the issue I think people are having. So after that, on day 31, the decision that was made, and let's say they do go through the appeal process, they appeal only to the director. No one else in the city of Atlanta can be appealed to, not the council, not the sheriff, not the police chief, just the code enforcement, right?
The initial appeal is to the director of the code enforcement
section. And then the next step, the only other person they can appeal to is the courts.
The court, yes, municipal court, and then on to Superior Court.
Okay.
Yes.
And so on day 30, and if all the appeals run afoul, let's say you go through that in 60 days, let's say that the city of, let's say that you're already on the interim process, you just filled all your appeals, the city is not going to demolish your house for a year and a half. What can you do? Now that you're in let's say 2 months later, you're in a different situation. You just hit the lottery. What can you do to save your family treasure?
So what we mentioned earlier is if we are outside of the appeals process, if we are outside of the compliance period, then we are asking that they contact our office so that we can have a conversation. But at the same time, we want to be careful with that, because if I'm going to have a conversation with you who just won the lottery versus someone who has not won the lottery and does not have the funding to bring their property into compliance, we want to be fair. So I think we have to, a part of this conversation is what can we do to, outside of the appeals process, what can we do for everyone if someone comes to us after this fact and they want to bring their property into compliance? Again, I think we need to, if we're going to work with someone outside of the compliance period who has the means, we need to work with someone outside that compliance period.
I want to work with everybody.
That does not. But I think that is probably going to be a policy change or an administrative change in the code for us to do that fairly. Yes.
That's why we got a brand new council, and we heard folks, the average term of members is 15 years, and it's supposed to be a 3-year thing. So people just haven't been watching this. And that's what I think people just haven't been watching this. And so I'm excited to hear all these new advice, because now I can move and we can go and find some solutions.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you for coming down here today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. So my questions for fire is, in your placarding process, other than physically placing that placard on the building, is there any process or follow-up after that? For example, like code enforcement's placards are they recorded with the city in a cella? So if someone goes and tries to apply for a permit for that building, are they blocked from doing that? Is it recorded in a cella? Do you give any notices to the owners? I heard you say it says you can give notice to the owners, but is it actually occurring? And then when those placards are made, are you sending a list to refer those properties over to code enforcement to make sure they are on their radar? Because they're not always, I found that not to be always the case.
So currently those placards are not listed in a cellar. Going forward, the Atlanta Fire will supply code enforcement with the list of all of the properties that we placard. We're currently just using them now for firefighter safety to kind of let the firefighters know what kind of structure they're going into. But going forward, we will make sure that code enforcement gets those properties.
Appreciate that. And with this placarding program, I saw this actually started, it was, I guess, 5+ years ago now, maybe longer. But what is like you all go out in spring and fall to inspect hydrants. Is this something you all do now or can do proactively and send over, each station in their first response area, send over, hey, code enforcement, these are the top 5 or top 10 properties that we do not want to see a fire and have us to enter and possibly get injured. Do y'all now send that, or can that be something you explore doing?
That is something we can explore doing, and we do it from 2 fronts. Our fire inspectors, they do it on a daily basis. Whenever they see a property, kind of do an inspection on it, they'll placard it, and going forward, we're going to get our people from field operations involved in the process as well.
Yeah, because I think that would be useful, because, they get, lists and emails from council members, but I would like to also see lists from fire being sent to code enforcement as, this is the top 10 properties in, Station 22's district that we really do not want to see a fire in and have the potential for one of our firefighters to get injured. So I think that would be very helpful.
We can do that. Any
other questions for fire? We'll move on to law.
I have a very quick one.
Ramos.
I know the arson unit is able to bring charges when there's arson. Returning back to a burnt out structure, which is not, returning back to a burnt out structure, and maybe I'm fishing here, is there a charge or something that could be levied on that property owner for unsafe condition, unsafe something? I'm looking for another tool in your toolbox that we could use to get rid of some of these structures.
Excuse me, Deputy Chief Burton. So investigations only investigate cases where the fire was in a suspicious manner. That's mostly a code enforcement or fire inspections. So if they go out and those corrections have not been made, then we can actually cite those individuals. But it would not be on the investigation section.
Okay, thank you. Then very quickly, is there a difference between, and this may be for Ms. Talley, housing as far as residential or commercial when we do enforcement? Is there a difference, or all enforcement on living spaces are the same?
Well, from a fire perspective, we only do enforcement on commercial buildings. And I think code enforcement is residential, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Talley.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. So the code, the inspection is the same. The difference in what the community will see is the difference in the placards that we post. The yellow is for residential and the green is for commercial, but the inspection is the same.
Okay, and at a later date, we'll talk about the commercial property that we all know about, where residents are still staying in a unit, next door is burnt out.
Yep.
And we just want to let them know we coming, so they need to clean it up.
Okay, thank you.
And then I did have one additional question I left off, and want you to clarify your process after a structure fire, and whether it's different, whether there is a homeowner there that certainly needs your help, or if it's a vacant structure, because I believe I've seen after a structure fire, AFRD go back out and do some boarding of properties. And while that is extremely helpful, if, again, was an occupied property and that person needs help while they work with their insurance, I'm all for that. But where it becomes a problem is if that is done on an open and vacant property, then that hampers code enforcement from going in and doing a full inspection on that property and getting that over 50% demolition number so that derelict property can be demolished. So what is y'all's process now? Is that correct? Or?
Yes, we have vendors that come out and do the board up work, throughout the city. I can understand your concern in that it may impact code enforcement inspection process, but I think if we're communicating with code enforcement and letting them know the buildings that we're going to board up or that has been boarded up, I think we can work that out with the independent vendor to get it open back up for code enforcement to do an inspection.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think there does need to be some communication there, and code enforcement needs to know, especially certainly when that has already been an open and vacant property and there's a fire that occurs, then when that in-rem proceeding comes, they can't go in and do that property inspection.
Excuse me, let me add to that. So when we start talking about vendors coming out and securing properties, those are residential occupied properties. So if someone's home that they are currently occupied catches fire, the point of securing those properties is to ensure that they don't suffer any additional damages through weather or vandalism. So what it is that we ensure that those properties that are occupied are secure.
Definitely want that to occur, but I'm speaking specifically to the open and vacant that have fires.
Those properties that are open and vacant, those will be under code enforcement, and we would placard those buildings the same way. If we have a fire, we would placard them as being hazardous for firefighter entry, or if they have additional fires, then we can actually make entry to try to extinguish those. But those that we placard in red, those are strictly for defensive purposes. The ones in green that we can actually enter. But if we end up placarding a building and we require the owner to secure that building, then that's something we would have to work with code enforcement on. But I just didn't want the process of securing residential and the vendors to get crossed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And just I'll get to you just a second, Councilmember Lewis. Just a time check. We have this meeting is to end about 10 to 1. And we have looks about 10 minutes or so of public comment, so that leaves us with about 30 minutes to get through our chit-chat and hear from law. So just want to put that on everyone's radar. Councilmember Lewis.
I just want to say thank you for the work you've been doing. I didn't know the difference between who demolishes what, but I haven't had any calls about the work y'all are doing. So I say I appreciate you, and I see those signs like you just showed them to me. So I appreciate all the work y'all doing. And Chief Smith he's running a very tight ship over there. So I appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. Anyone else? Question for fire? Councilmember Boone.
Again, I just want to thank you all for what you all do. Unless you have a person that is ill or elderly person, a lot of time you just think that the fire guys are just folks you wave at and see, but you all actually save lives. So I just want to thank you all for your diligence and hard work and always being those first responders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you all very much. Next, we will hear from our law department. We have, of course, Ms. Robinson and Ms. Washington to talk about any of the city's liabilities when it comes to either, not going through the due process that is laid out, or, the example I gave earlier, someone or particularly a firefighter getting injured when the city has already have it on their radar and already has a case initiated or an in-rem demo demolished, and that gets delayed, the city's liabilities in those matters.
Thank you, Chair Hillis. Again, Amber A. Robinson, City of Atlanta Department of Law. In regards to a scenario where the city is aware that a property is either subject to the in-rem proceedings or has already gone through the in-rem proceedings and an order has been issued in regards to those properties, the city, due to the principles of sovereign and official immunity, is not likely to be found liable by a court for any injuries that may occur on those properties. The properties, I think, to the point earlier that you made, are not, or the properties don't become the property and they're thus responsibility of the city as a result of these proceedings. They remain the properties and the responsibilities of the private property owners of those properties, and thus the city does not acquire premises-related liability in regards to those properties, regardless of their position in this particular process. In regards to due process, the city protects against determinations that the due process rights of any property owner or the property itself have been violated by following the process as set forth in the Housing Code. That process provides what is the constitutional requirement for due process, which is adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard. That notice is given as set forth in the Housing Code and has been described by Ms. Talley. And the opportunity to be heard is given before the, in this case, interim, administrative interim board, and then on to the municipal court as far as the appeal process, and then thereafter to the Superior Court. As long as the city is maintaining that notice and opportunity to be heard as provided specifically in the code, then the city is, we are confident that the city's actions would not violate the due process rights of any persons or properties involved.
All right, thank you for that perspective from law. Any questions for Ms. Robinson from Law Department? All right, thank you, Ms. Robinson. It does say discussion next, but I actually want to hear from the public first, and then we'll have a quick discussion on our next steps before we adjourn. So moving to public comment, our first person signed up for public comment is Tina Arnold.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tina Arnold, and I am a District 12 resident. I have been a resident since 2003. The time that I moved to my neighborhood, I lived on a street of 20 houses, and at the time there were about 7 that were vacant. There was a time that I was actually the only person living on my block of 10, and we got to work. We moved. Most of the people that know me because of all the work that we, the community, did with no funding. And when you're talking about these houses that are being knocked down in District 12, I'm here to tell you, majority of those complaints are not coming from developers. It's coming from people like me that have been complaining about those exact same properties for over 10 years. This isn't new. These complaints aren't new. When we're talking about people that have been owning these properties, most of them were owning these properties as LLCs. They did a lot of fraud work in our neighborhoods, and we have been stuck with them. We have seen a lot of movement in the last couple of years. Thank you. And majority of the problems that we still have today are from people playing games, people that have never lived in those houses, that have been investors, that have held on to this because they want the big payday, but they don't care about what they've done to us year after year after year. My organization and I clean and closed for free over 50 houses in my neighborhood. We didn't wait for the city. We remember the days when Housing Code may have had computers, but they didn't use them. They had manila file folders stacked up this high. The guy that was running Housing Code invited me down to show me why when I was calling over and over and over again saying, what do you mean you got to find the folder? They literally had to find a manila folder. We were spending all our money across the way in building permits, but we were spending no money in housing code. Housing code has always got the brunt of and the least. And we, as people that live in that neighborhood, don't deserve it. We don't deserve to continue having these LLCs come into our neighborhoods and hold on, not caring. And then when you call them, because yes, I call them myself. When you call them and you say, hey, look, I live next door to this. I live right down the street from this. What can you do to help me out? They go, well, we cut the grass last year. Well, excuse me, you cut your grass every week to 2 weeks, but you expect that the grass over there is going to stop growing? You have a responsibility, and they've been working to take care of this for us, but we have to move out of the way. These aren't new problems. These are old problems. These problems have existed for far too long. If you're talking about a house that grandma owned and then grandma died or grandma left, then that's very different from LLCs. It's also very different from, right now, my top 7 list of very egregious people, top 7. 5 are burned out houses. Completely burnt. Why do we have to keep looking at these things? And then when housing code calls them, we're going to take care of it.
Go ahead and wrap up your comments. This is a 3-minute.
But so my thing is this: you need to work together, not just housing code plus fire plus permitting, because some of them will get permits, but then you guys never realize that they've had permits put on these properties, and so that's where you go and you tag them quick. The business licenses, because these LLCs need to be tracked down. And then you want to know how grandma and all them should know? Put it on the news. Grandma watches the news at 5, at 4:30. Put it on the news. Let everybody know your house has a problem. And you've got to fix it, and you got to fix it now. So any more questions for me? I'm willing to answer any that you've got, because I have been in the work for free, working alongside these people. So what do you need?
Thank you, Ms. Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
Where exactly do you live in District 12?
I live on Gould Street, 23 Gould Street.
We have the list, council member. I can give you her contact information if that's okay with you. So
yes.
I just wanted to reach out to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask her why she was, because she's someone live in my district. So I think the houses we were talking about, not the LLCs. I'm not talking about the LLCs. The calls I'm getting from people aren't from LLCs calling me, telling me that their house is being torn down. The stories I'm talking about, that's why I'm able to name people by their names. And I'm talking about the south side of the district where the houses that are being torn down, people are living there. Like, for example, not living there.
We're talking the houses that are being torn down in my neighborhood have been vacant for over 10 years.
A little bit southern of the southern part of the district where because you just said you're working directly with them for the 50 houses in your community. I mean, in your part of the district that you see, right? So I'm saying that the people that are calling me are being called to me because they don't know how to remedy. What's the appeal process? And they're saying they own these houses. It's not an LLC. These are people that figured out how to reach out to a council person via social media, because they have never looked up my office. They don't even know I'm downtown at our office. So they found me on social media, DM me or DM someone around me, and then we have communications. They're then telling me, hey, what's the appeal process? How can we stop this? Which is why we had a meeting with code enforcement. I'm happy that you've been so diligently doing this, because a lot of folks don't have the energy to actually do it, which is why they sent me down here to ask these questions, which is why we having this meeting today. Like, for example, we have 5 board members. This is the biggest thing. 5 board members, and the average term they've been there is 15 years. They're supposed to only be there 3. That alone is a huge issue.
You can have an issue with it, but who are you going to get to fill their space? And so that's the next question.
We're not going to do this back and forth. If you want to reach out to your constituent and
call me on the phone. You got
that conversation, we can, but we're taking up other people's public comment time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Next is Swapa Kumo.
Good morning or good afternoon now, honorable members of the council, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for members of code enforcement for the very difficult job that they do, and I do support you. In high school, I worked as a bag boy for Key Foods in New York City. It was a rough neighborhood. We had a lot of crime, a lot of shoplifting there. Ultimately, management got very fed up of that, and they brought in a security guard. Remember this guy? His name was Ralph. Very intimidating. Huge guy, ex-NYPD, and he viewed everyone as a shoplifter. He was very good at his job. Everyone was afraid of him and stayed away from him, but he got the crime down and increased safety. One day, Ralph saw a kid walk past checkout with a candy bar, take a bite of it, and put it in his pocket. Ralph followed him outside, grabbed him by the throat. These were going back 40 years, and accused him of shoplifting. While this was going on, a few people gathered. The kid's mother finally walked out of the store, and she started screaming and told Ralph that she had paid for the candy bar. Ralph wanted to see the receipt, which she had already trashed, so now they had to wait for the cashier, and it was finally cleared up. The kid, who was completely innocent, was badly shaken up. My point is that in any human endeavor, there will be mistakes in the process. I have rehabilitated about 30 houses in the city, and I have not sold a single one. Every one of my properties are used for affordable housing under the Section 8 program, extremely well-kept properties, and this particular property that I'm talking about, 3163 Browns Mill Road, I bought from the city itself, the City of Atlanta Land Bank. It had been derelict for several years while owned by the city. Before buying it, we did title search. It showed absolutely no list pendants. There were no issues, no notices against the property. 2 weeks after buying the property, I was hit with a notice of demolition. We went to the interim board, and we were given 60 days to clean it up, which we did. We took out 7 dumpsters, tons of dead animals, nest of snakes, and accumulated dump debris that had been there for several years. We've spent a total of about $20,000 to $25,000 in this. After doing this, I reached back to code enforcement several times to have the placard removed. I was supposed to send a check. I sent the check. The check was lost by the city finance department 3 times. Ultimately, a kindly lady from there met me outside. This was when the city hall was closed because of all the COVID issues. Even to this day, it has not been confirmed that the placard has been removed. Yet, a few weeks ago, there was a red X put on the property. When I reached out to the department, I was told that, ironically, the property is being demolished because I didn't apply for a building permit. I could not apply for a building permit because there's a placard on the property. So I'm caught in this absolute circle. The department,
you go ahead and wrap up your comments too.
Okay. The department, like Ralph, believes that, they refuse to believe that I have done everything I can to work as a responsible owner. I've reached out many, many times. They have my email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, etc. And I think that, if they would just examine this process, they would see that I have not received a single notice whatsoever, and I asked the council members to look into this and provide some relief. I'm ready, willing, and able to rehabilitate the property into an affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
And he lives in District 12 too, so I would like to talk to him as well, if that's cool. Thank you so much for coming down here again. District 12 is extremely represented today.
Yes.
These are some of the calls we're getting, and Ms. Talley's here today. And so we'll try to set up to where you can have a conversation with somebody, because these are the issues I'm having. And I would like for law to let me know how can we help folks in this position. And I'm going to give you another example, because I just got a text message similar to that one. A person purchased a house that was not supposed to be torn down, and then after owning it, I'm going to read the text exactly, actually, because they actually even use the terms. In-rim demo. After running title and purchasing the home, the client started the process to rehab it. The architects were told this property was basically deemed as a teardown, and they had to go through the city to have it removed. The owner was able to speak with someone in the city, pay some type of fee for this to be removed, with the understanding that this was taken care of. Months later, they were notified that this in-rim demo still stands and will not be removed even after paying the fine. And these are the issues that I'm having. I don't know, how do I help that person, because they're all coming from District 12.
Yes.
I mean, they're coming from other districts, but we got folks who sat in here and waited hours to talk today because we having both issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman.
And I think my question was to the attorneys on how do we help this person or people like him.
Good afternoon, Amber A. Robinson, City of Atlanta Department of Law. Without being able to research the individual case that you're describing, I'm not going to be able to provide any sort of opinion as to what, the next steps for that individual case would likely be in accordance with the law. And so I would need, to research that further. And of course, we're not, the Department of Law is not, in a position to provide individual legal advice to an individual person in their interactions with the city. So there's that as well. But based on, we wouldn't be able to render an opinion based on just this information.
What about his?
That would also be the case. We would need to research the situation. We are not able to provide legal advice to persons regarding their individual cases also.
And I don't know how to help you. That's what I'm saying. I'm getting these calls. I don't know how to help you right now.
Meanwhile, the juggernaut moves on and the property is slated for demolition. I believe, since we filed in municipal court, I believe the city attorney themselves are supportive of giving a reprieve. We have submitted detailed plans, architect-drawn plans and specs, and we still can't pull a permit.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Ms. Waits, do you have?
Yes, sir. It's my
Please keep it
understanding.
brief. This is a time for the public to speak, not for us to
Absolutely.
back and forth.
This is germane to this conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
It's my understanding that those 3 properties in question were put on some type of administrative hold. Is he one of those properties? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Next is Quentin Morgan. Quentin Morgan, you still with us? Like to speak? Okay. Next is Marvin Tiller. Marvin Tiller, you still with us and wish to speak? Okay. All right, that completes public comment. Now, I know we've had a lot of discussion about present status and next steps. So were there any, closing statements or questions that my colleagues would like to ask, either Code Enforcement, Ms. Talley, Fire, Law, before we adjourn? Councilmember Lewis?
I know we were able to put his property on a hold, but that was a very hard process to get it there. I need to know how to help folks. I need to know how, when this happens, I need to know how to help them easily, or I need to know a person I can call. Can we at least give me somebody I can call? Because I'm getting these calls all the time. And thank you for reaching out to my office as well.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Lewis. You can contact me directly. If you want my information, I can give it to you. You have it? Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Weiss, do you have additional?
Mr. Chair, I think that it's time that we review the code and look for opportunities for these unique situations. And again, I am grateful for the work that you're doing. I live in District 12, and I'm very familiar with the things and the challenges that we've seen over the years. And my family's owned property in the community since 1972. So I'm very familiar with the work you're doing, and I'm grateful. But I do believe that there are unique circumstances that we need to examine specific to seniors and their property to make sure that we are doing everything housing for those individuals who do desire to be fully compliant. I'm also in full support for those ones who are non-compliant to figure out a way to accelerate the process specific to LLCs as well as companies and businesses who have not been good stewards. Thank you.
Councilmember Waits. Colleagues, closing questions, concerns? Councilmember Boone?
Yes, Ms. Talley, will you please be in touch with Harold and Juanita Morton, leaders in the Collier Heights community? They would like to do a tour. They have certain structures that they like to point out. So Harold and Juanita Morton of the Collier Heights, historic Collier Heights community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boone. Anyone else? Questions, concerns before we close out? All right. Well, once again, thank you all from APD Code Enforcement Section. Deputy Director Talley, thank you. Atlanta Fire Rescue, and thank you to the Law Department and also my colleagues who attended today and asked questions and voiced concerns. So we will stand adjourned. Thank you.